Thank you, everyone, for joining for these live internet studies week after week. My name is Ariel, ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. The live internet study, if you're listening to the entire study, is an hour and a half long. There's two segments involved. First segment is entitled Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End Time Events. Eschatology is the study of end times, where we talk about prophecy, end time prophecy, Jesus' return, rapture, resurrection, Mystery Babylon, Book of Revelation, Book of Daniel, things like that. So if that's a topic you're interested in, stick around. We're going to jump into that next. The other 30-minute topic that's part of my live studies is entitled A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism, and it is an apologetic study. Apologetic means that I am defending the faith from the perspective that I believe is accurate. And so I'm a biblical Trinitarian. I believe that Father, Son, Holy Spirit are all God, yet there's one God, yet three persons. I can't explain it. I'm a Mysterian. It's a mystery. And yet it is a truth that I hold with a conviction. I'm taking this position sort of over and against the biblical Unitarian position. They're my imaginary opponent. I mean, they're not imaginary, they're real life. But we're not debating in real life. So stick around if that's a topic that you're interested in. Okay, let's jump into Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End. Is that right? Yeah, Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End Time Events. If you look on your screen right now, we're in topic 12, Rapture Views of Final Analysis. And so what I am doing is, let me jump over to my screen here. What you're looking at is that there are 4 views of the rapture that I have been interacting with in this particular study, and in no particular order, but there's the pre-trib rapture up here in the upper left corner. There's the mid-trib rapture over here. Then we've got the, let's see if I can draw my squares right. They're not looking too pretty, but oh well. Post-trib rapture in the lower left corner. And then finally we've got the the pre-wrath rapture in the lower right corner. And all 4 of these have some differing details on the answering the question, when will God rapture the church? But there are noticeable differences between them. So we've been interacting with these particular perspectives. In case you're wondering which one I hold to, that's the one. I hold to the pre-wrath rapture myself. I think that's the position that's the most biblically accurate. However, as I've said in other shows, and I'll continue to say in as I go forward, this is not a position that I'm convicted about. I wouldn't, as Tim Hague says, fall on my sword for this particular position, but I do believe it to be the more biblically accurate position. I am open to dialoguing with people of different perspectives. I am not open to disfellowshipping over these different positions. So if you're watching my YouTube videos and you're interacting with me, you're asking questions, I'm open to asking and answering, but I'm absolutely not open to debating and arguing over. I'm not going to throw you under the bus if you hold to a different position. So don't try to take that particular aspect in your comments with me. What you do with other people is up to you. But so where are we at in our study? We're actually focusing on a set of material that examines the strengths and weaknesses of the mid-trib rapture, and we've used gotquestions.org's short little answer to this question, what are the strengths and weaknesses? And so they put together their study. I'm not going to go through that again. We've already done that in past weeks. What I'm doing instead is I provided my own response to Got Questions essay. And what I did as a Prewrather is I'm doing my own sort of review of the strengths and weaknesses, but I'm only interacting with Got Questions resource. So just real quick by way of shows, we are not meeting on the 12th. Some of this YouTube video will go out before then, so you'll know that you'll know beforehand that we're not meeting. Let me pull up a calendar just real quick, interrupt my own teaching. We're not meeting on the 12th because that is the essentially Erev Pesach, the first day of Passover. It happens on a Saturday night, and I don't want you to have to divide your attention between meeting with me and meeting with your local church or congregation if they're holding a Passover Seder or something like that, or if you're doing it in your home, then your primary obligation is to that biblical festival, not to meet with some internet guy who's talking about the Torah. So meet locally. Don't meet with me because I'm not going to even be here. I'm going to be running reruns. So the 12th, no show. Likewise, the 19th is the 7th day of Passover, or some people just say it's the 8th day of Passover. But either way, there's a biblical command to have a meeting on both of those days, the 1st and the 7th days. So no meeting on the 19th of April either. We won't meet again until the 26th of April. So basically, the first Saturday of April we are meeting, and the last Saturday of April we are meeting, and that's it. Okay, let's jump back into the show. Here's where we left off last week. I left off in these notes in paragraph number 5, talking about how that in rapture models, particularly the mid-trib rapture model that we're examining closely right now, God's wrath is signaled as beginning at the midpoint of the week. And when I say midpoint there, let me bring up a slide so you can see what I'm talking about here. Oops, I guess we don't need that anymore. Here we go. So in this particular model, in the mid-trib model, we've got their rapture right here at the midpoint of the week. But notice that what happens is the midpoint kicks off their particular version of what they understand to be the timing of God's wrath. This means that from their perspective, the church goes through an initial part of the tribulation, only to be raptured out from that situation just before, give me a second, I'm going to erase that one, just before the Great Tribulation kicks off. So the church is excused from the Great Tribulation in the mid-trib model, but they go through some form of tribulation. So in this way, you could say they're trying to find the balance between those verses that clearly have the church suffering for her stance on who Yeshua is, but at the same time, they believe that there are verses that say that God has not destined us to wrath. And so they have to have a rapture that removes the church from the brunt of God's wrath. And when I say it that way, I agree with that theology. So when I go back over, sorry, that's not where I wanted to go. When I go back over to my notes, we left off talking about this wrath about to begin. Here's what I said last week, this last note. Revelation 6:17. This is my view as a Prewrather. I'm interacting with the mid-trib perspective on when the wrath comes, when it happens, and where do we see this sequencing in, say, the book of Revelation. Revelation 6:17, as I say, these are my words, not gotquestions.org. I believe that Revelation 6:17 suggests that God's wrath is about to begin when we get to Revelation 6:17, meaning it hasn't happened yet. If you remember, the pre-trib model of the rapture is at the by the time we get to Revelation chapter 6 here, that the wrath of God has already begun. So if I jump back over to their model, this is the pre-trib model, right? Their rapture is way over here on the far left side of your screen. That represents the beginning of what they call the 7-year tribulation. By comparison, their second coming is way over here on the right side. So you notice this 7-year gap between these two events. I don't subscribe to that perspective. But germane to my point is that their God's wrath model is right here in the middle. So this means it starts, their model of God's wrath starts way at the beginning. The entire 7 years is God's wrath. Likewise, they conflate the word wrath in some ways with the word tribulation right here. So even though their model shows a tribulation at the front end of the 7 years, and it shows a great tribulation at the back end for the final 3.5 years, in reality, all of it is God's wrath in their model. And so when they read passages that say that God has not destined us to wrath, or God is going to deliver us from this time frame that I will keep you from the hour of trial that's going to come upon the whole world, like Revelation 3:10 talks about, the pre-trib model must find a rapture that happens prior to any of this taking place, meaning they must hold to what's referred to as a dispensational 7 years of wrath, of which the church is raptured prior to any of the 7 years going down. So going back to my notes here, I believe that this is inaccurate. In other words, I think the mid-trib model is closer to the what is accurate. So by the time we get to Revelation 6:17, I mentioned this last week. This is supposed to be a review, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. As the Greek aorist tense simply states it, the wrath has arrived, right? We could get into that later, but I don't want to focus on it now. But just to know that the aorist tense really doesn't have a tense. It gains its tense from the other verbs around it, from the context. So aorist literally means in Greek no tense, as it were. So this aligns, I say, with the pre-wrath sequence that the rapture and the day of the Lord's wrath both occur after the 6th seal, not at the 7th trumpet. So remember, the pre-wrath rapture is always going to, let me see if I've got a little slide to show you this. Give me a moment. Pre-wrath, let's use this one for a moment. Pre-wrath is going to have the seals running along the bottom here of the screen, like you can see, only to get to the 6th seal sign in the sky right there. Wow, didn't mean to do that. So they got the seals down here, and then we've got our 6th seal right there, which puts our rapture right there. So that's the rapture, this part right there. Notice that the Great Tribulation is here, and the day of the Lord is here, which means, according to the pre-wrath model, this is a pre-wrath model that you're looking at, right? So let's give it some love. There we go. According to the pre-wrath model, this is the more accurate sequencing. When does the wrath of God begin? Let me see. Let me erase that a little line there in the middle. Okay. When does the wrath of God begin? So here's our rapture there. The wrath of God, the day of the Lord, begins here in the after the Great Tribulation is cut short by the rapture itself. So the rapture is right there, right? So when we look at our sequencing and timing, we pre-tribbers, when we're looking at mid-tribbers, we say mid-tribulationism actually mistimes the rapture, placing it at the 7th trumpet, and we believe that that's too late in terms of putting the 7th, I'm sorry, how do I say this? Mid-tribulation mistimes the rapture. Placing it at the 7th trumpet is too late, according to our understanding of where the 7th trumpet occurs, which is end of the week. So if I go back over to my slide here, we're going to put the 7th trumpet, well, no, that's not quite right either. I don't want it that far out. If I just put the end of the week, that's where I would call the 7th trumpet. In other words, if we put if the 7th trumpet coincides with the end of the week, and if the rapture coincides with the 7th trumpet, then we would really be just looking at a post-trib rapture. But we think that's too late. Setting it at the midpoint is too early, meaning setting the 7th trumpet too early. All right, so now I'm ready to jump into today's study. Basically, we're in paragraph 6, and I'm going to try and finish this tonight. I'm certain that I can. Got Questions says, in regards to critiquing the mid-trib view, no explicit timeline is given in Scripture, allowing for multiple interpretations. All right? Wow, surprise, surprise. What's my response? Prewrath says, GotQuestions.org calls this a final weakness shared by all rapture views, quote unquote. That's what they actually say in their own essay that we looked at earlier. Prewrath admits that while it is true that no single passage lays out a complete timeline, Prewrath maintains that a proper harmonization of much of the book of Daniel, Matthew 24, 1 Corinthians 15, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and the book of Revelation does indeed provide the Bible student with a coherent sequence. Now I'm going to show you the sequence that, as a Prewrather, that I find to be the most accurate at this point. Again, let me make this disclaimer. I don't suppose that I, as a Prewrather, have all the answers. I'm simply saying that I appreciate all the insights that are brought to the table of discussion from all of the other opinions, right? All those other 4 views as to timing of certain sequencing. What's the chronology? What's the application of the words in question? Tribulation, wrath, rapture, etc., etc. All I'm saying is that it's beneficial to have what I would call some familiarity with all of the views. In fact, I kind of have noticed, I'm saying this in support of my own YouTube channel and my own research, when I watch other YouTube channels and they talk about rapture and things, rapture views, I find that they kind of highlight their own view, almost to the exclusion of looking at the other views. Every now and then they'll mention some of the other views, but they'll spend the majority of their video focusing on their own view. And I almost get the impression that they're not familiar enough with what the other view is teaching for me to make my own informed decision. At least they don't present the other views as clearly or as detailed. And I think I'm providing that need to my viewers. I mean, I keep going back and forth to the four views that people are able to look at, right? I mean, I keep going back to this view here on my studies so that you can get your own perspective of what is out there. What views can I use the Bible to get a look at? What I'm trying to say is that do yourself a favor and don't just focus on one of the views. Bounce off of the other views, and you're going to learn this very important truth. All of the views have some truth. All of the views have some details that they're getting right. So try to develop a view that harmonizes with all of the strengths of the view, the strengths of all the views, and discards the weaknesses of the views. And guess what? The Prewrath is already trying to do that. I don't hear the pre-tribbers doing that. I don't hear the post-tribbers doing that. I don't hear the mid-tribbers doing that. Although, I will say that each new successive view that comes along looks at the previous ones before and says, well, here's why we think that they're wrong and here's why we think we're right. So it's almost like the advantage of the latest view that come along is always going to have the benefit of the ones previous to use it as in its research. So in that regard, yes, pre-trib was one of the, I think post-trib was one of the earliest ones in terms of descriptions. Pre-trib, it probably came next. I think mid-trib came after that, and then pre-wrath is probably the latest on the scene. So, but that doesn't mean that the truths of pre-wrath are brand new. It just means that we are finally at a point where God is revealing more and more to us, and there's an advantage to being able to claim that as we get closer to the events, that the Spirit of God is going to continue to reveal more and more to us. And so in that regard, Prewrath is in the lead at the moment, right? We're closer because there's an advantage to being the Johnny come lately. All right, let's go into my notes here. So let me talk about what I believe is a fairly coherent sequencing that we can work from. Point number one, this is not completely detailed, but it's going to give you some of the main points. When we're looking at the 7th week of Daniel, we're going to start noticing that the apostasy and the rise of the Antichrist is going to become noticeable in the world. We're not talking about tribulation just yet, per se. 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4. We're just talking about someone who will... Let me show this to you by way of slides. Give me a moment. I want to pull up maybe this slide again. Let's go back over here. So zoom in a bit for you. Let me get rid of some of this busyness. Okay. All right. So what we're talking about is this is the 7th week of Daniel. Notice that over on the far left side of the screen, representing the beginning of the 7th week, we have Antichrist making a covenant with the many, and this represents the first seal of the book of Revelation. So this would be the kicking off of the 7th week. But what I'm talking about is that he might not be known as the Antichrist at this point in time. However, I think he will certainly be known as a world player because he will be involved in some sort of peace deal, peace agreement, peace experiment with Israel and her surrounding hostile neighbors. And this will enable them to begin, as Jewish people, looking towards initiating animal sacrifices. So I don't believe that that will be an event that could be hidden from the world. World sacrifices on the Temple Mount, Jewish sacrifices on the Temple Mount, on the same place where currently there are Muslim buildings up there. Perhaps this peace agreement will allow the Muslims and the Jews to co-occupy that same space. I don't know the details, but either way, it'll be something that perhaps can't be hidden. However, eventually, Yeshua tells us that there'll be this apostasy. It could be the church apostatizing. It could be Israel apostatizing. I'm not sure which apostasy. It could be both, but either way, eventually, when we go back to our screen here, the abomination of desolation that is prophesied to take place in the middle, it's what's going to, and will this be the fourth seal? I don't know. It could be as early as some of the other seals down here. But either way, by the time we get to the midpoint of the week, if we're still here, as Christians, then the Antichrist at this point in time will be making his headline splash on the world, because the activities that we're going to be moving into next, as we see point number 2, is that the abomination of desolation at the midpoint of the week is the Antichrist's debut in public. Whether he was the one that we knew about earlier, that we suspected 3.5 years earlier, that is all going to come to an end as far as speculation, because he's going to begin to implement things in the world that are going to be unavoidable. Namely, we're going to be starting to see mark of the beast activity that should be implemented at that point in time. Persecution worldwide, perhaps maybe starting small in Israel, but eventually spreading to the rest of the world. Persecution of Christians and Jews. We have persecution on both sides. I'm going to flash in post-production this kind of slide that shows some of the activities that will take place during the midpoint of the week. So by this point in time, and if you're watching this YouTube video, you're probably looking at it right now. This was put together by Robert Van Camp, and it's a page out of his book, but I don't have it available right now, so I apologize. But some of the activities that you're seeing about midpoint activities, if we're still here as Christians, if I'm right in my timing, then these will be unmistakable activities. Notice, if you haven't already seen it, one of those activities will be the arrival of the 2 witnesses, as far as I understand. But let's keep going. The third thing on my list is that the Great Tribulation, which is cut short by the cosmic disturbances, the Great Tribulation, which started at the midpoint of the week or thereabouts, will be cut short at some unknown time by the cosmic disturbances of the 6th seal. Reference Matthew 24:21 through 22, Revelation 6:12 through 17. So on my chart here, we're talking about this 6th seal sign down here that coincides with cutting short, and then see if I can get that to, no, but won't do it. Cutting short and separating the Great Tribulation from any other time of that particular week. So it's this 6th seal sign here that we Christians have been told in advance is going to be something that we can look up and watch for to signal our redemption, to signal the imminent return at this point of the Lord Yeshua. At this point in time, nothing will be left but to look up and see our Lord coming back for us. This rapture that I'm describing is going to be preceded immediately by the resurrection. My understanding is that they'll be back to back. They're simultaneous events. The pre-tribbers have a problem with putting resurrection and rapture together. I think some models split their resurrection from rapture, placing the rapture at the beginning of the 7 years, placing the resurrection at the very end of the 7 years along with the second coming. Other models try to put their resurrection and rapture together at the very beginning of the 7 years. As a Prewrather, I put them right here after the 6th seal. When will this Great Tribulation be cut short? I don't say in my notes. It's just cut short. That's it. That's all we know. Yeshua says those days will be cut short in Matthew here. He says those days will be cut short for the sake of the elect. The elect here is often mistakenly only limited to Israel. I think that's a big mistake. I believe Yeshua is referring to the elect known as his own followers, because earlier he mentions that the persecution you'll be suffering is on account of my name. So it's not just the elect of God as in Israel. Rather, it is the elect of Yeshua. It is believers that are persecuted for his name and who are enduring this great tribulation at the hands of Antichrist and evil men, anyone who's going to be a Christian hater at that time. And it is these Christians, those of us who are alive at that time, that survive, like Paul says, we who are alive and remain, that Greek word remain there is a word that can be used to describe someone who survives a horrendous accident or an attack or even a natural disaster, a survivor. We who are alive and survive, is what I'm saying, will be caught up with those who are resurrected to meet the Lord in the air. So that's the timing and sequence so far, point number 3. When we look at point number 4, in my little outline here, the resurrection and rapture immediately after the tribulation of those days, but before the initiation of the day of the Lord's wrath. This is going to happen next. Going back to my little chart here. Immediately after the great tribulation of those days, right? So this guy right there, immediately after the great tribulation, but before the day of the Lord is poured out here. So Christians will be raptured prior to the day of the Lord, but not prior to experiencing some tribulation. We are going to suffer for our faith if we're around. We are going to likely lose our life if we stand our ground, if we stand with the Messiah and do not take the mark, do not take the number of his name, do not yield to the rule of the Antichrist, right? He's going to come after us.